it's Thursday and today we are making squirrels. Now this was the second chance vote put to my patrons from the last Not My Idea challenge. I just took a little moment to get back to it. Sorry about that. So there are two variations today. We have our regular squirrel over here in the red, and we have little Mr. storing his nuts away for the winter. I'm not going to call you that, I'm so sorry. All right, let's get into tools and materials. So for today's squirrel, you're going to need 8-ply 100% acrylic yarn in one color. You're also going to need your 3.5mm hook, pins and needles, scissors, some stuffing, and I'm going to be using 18mm safety eyes today. But you might find those to be a little bit big and you might want to choose to go with 12mm instead. But that's it. So today's pattern will be sent out to my patrons and will also be made available in my Etsy. I will leave links to both in the description down below for anybody who's interested. That squirrel is so dark red, it almost rejects the light, but I suppose when I hold it in the middle, you can see it okay. Okay, so here's a look at the little squirrel we are making today. Now he can be positioned either upright or down on all fours. The paw position stays exactly the same. And we also have a couple of little optional cheeks that you can add as well if the chubby cheek squirrel is the way you want to go. So those are our little two options. They're both made pretty much exactly the same way. So to start with today, we are going to make his little back feet, just because if we make those first, we can attach them in the round when we make the head and body, which is just one less piece that you have to sew on. So the feet are just tiny little triangular pockets. We're going to start at the tip of the toe and just work a couple of rows back towards the base. So start with a magic ring of 6. We're then going to work 2 repeats of an increase and then 2 single crochet to get us up to 8 stitches around. So there's 1. And there's 2. So that's what our piece currently looks like. We're then going to work 3 repeats of 8 single crochet around. So that's 24 stitches in total. And finish off. Now we won't be stuffing this piece at all, but I am just going to tuck those 2 loose ends down inside the piece. And for this tail, I'm going to just insert my hook through the next stitch around from the inside to the outside and just pull it through to the inside as well. So there is our first foot. And when we go to attach it, we're going to be squishing it flat to form 4 pairs of stitches that we'll be working through and attaching to the body as we go. So I've just squished mine flat with where we finished off along one edge, but that doesn't really matter. So there is one little foot, and you are of course going to need 2. So just pop those to one side for now and we will grab them again in a second. Okay, so now that we've made those, we are going to make our little head and body piece. So to make this piece, we start at the top of the head and then we work in rows, loading some increases at the front to create his little sort of snout, and then sort of shifting our increases to the back to create the little curve that we have here. And then in like the 3rd and 4th final rows, we are going to attach the feet as we go as well. So grabbing some more of our grey, we're going to start with a magic ring of 6. So for some of these rows, you may note that we have some complex brackets going on. So either like in row 3, where you have like 9 single crochet and then a set of brackets, or in row 11, where we actually have 2 distinct sets of brackets. And so this is just your reminder that when you encounter a pair of brackets, you just repeat the instructions inside the brackets the number of times listed on the outside. But otherwise you work the row normally from left to right. So using row 11 is an example where we will do all 3 repeats of the decrease before moving on to the second set of brackets, which is 3 repeats of a 5 single crochet, an increase, and then 4 single crochet. So if you just take things sort of one step at a time, you'll find this isn't too complex. So there we are at the end of row 11, and we are going to stop at this point and insert our eyes. So what you should be able to tell at this point is where the snout is. This should be like quite an easily identifiable little protuberance. And we're going to insert our eyes into row 5. So find your starting magic ring and count 5 rows down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then you're going to want to just position your eyes on either side of the nose. Now, as I mentioned in the tools and materials section, I'm using 18mm safety eyes, which I do think are kind of just on that edge of being too big. So 12mm safety eyes might be a better fit for your squirrel. So just make sure that they are kind of evenly spaced and look right to you from all angles. And when you're happy, snap the backs on. There we go. So now we're just going to carry on and work up the next 8 rows of the body. So there we are at the end of row 19. So in the next row, we're going to be attaching his little flipper feet that we made earlier. But first, we are just going to stuff this sort of head and body segment quite firmly. I'm just making sure that I'm getting the stuffing right into each of these little curves that we've made so that all of that shaping wasn't for nothing. Okay, so we're going to start by working the majority of row 20, which is 5 repeats of a decrease and then 3 single crochet. So there's our first one. Just like that. We're then going to work a final decrease. And then in the last 3 stitches of this row, which is just 3 single crochet, we're going to start attaching one of our feet. So as mentioned, we've squished it flat and we're going to be working through pairs of stitches. So what I'm going to do is line the open end of the foot up with the next 3 stitches that we're going to be working. And then I'm going to insert my hook through the first pair of stitches. So that is through both layers of the foot and then into the next stitch of the body. And I'm going to work a single crochet through all 3, like so. And I'm going to repeat that in the next 2 stitches as well. So picking up the next pair of stitches of the foot, then the stitch of the body. That's 2. We're going to do it again. So pair of stitches of the foot, stitch of the body, working our single crochet, and that's 3. So that is the end of that row, right? So we still actually have 1 stitch left to attach this foot, but that it rolls over basically into the next row. So we're going to just roll on with it. So the next row starts with a single crochet to finish attaching this foot. So I'm going to insert my hook through the final pair of stitches and into the body and finish off that single crochet. So that foot should now be attached via 4 stitches through both layers of the foot, so it's like a little flap. So we're now just going to work a couple of stitches to get around to where we're going to attach the next foot. So that is a single crochet and a decrease, just like so. Then I'm going to grab my second foot and once again lining the opening of that up with the next 4 stitches. I'm going to start by inserting my hook through the first pair of stitches of the leg, then into the body. So that's our first one done, and I'm going to do that 3 more times, just a single crochet through each of those pairs of stitches. Like so. So there are both feet attached. And with that, we are just going to carry on and finish off that row. So that is 5 repeats of a decrease and a single crochet. And then a final single crochet to finish. So there we are. So we just have 2 more rows to work to finish closing off this opening. So the next one is 6 repeats of a single crochet and then a decrease. Like so. And then 6 decreases to get us down to 6 stitches. And finish off. So you'll be left with this tiny opening at the bottom, and you're just going to take this remaining tail and weave it through the front loops only of each of those stitches. And then just pull it to close. So it's kind of like a little reverse magic ring. I'm just going to poke my hook through the body and then out through the middle and pull that inside to tuck it away. And there is the start of your little squirrel. So we are just going to place this to one side for now. And next up, we are going to make his tail. So for the tail, it's all made in one piece with no short rows, you'll be pleased to know. You might be able to see it better on the orange one. So for the tail, we start at the fat end, and then we just work a series of rows to form this little S bend. So how this all works is that we end up decreasing really heavily on one side while increasing on the other, and that allows us to get this kind of curved shape. We're also using that trick that I'm using a lot more often these days, where these stitches on top are half double crochet, while these stitches underneath are actually just regular single crochet, which gives us a little bit more of a curve to our stitches as well. You'll see how all of that works in just a minute. So, grabbing our colour again, we are now just going to work up the tail. And there we are at the end of row 8. So we've built up sort of the very fluffy end of the tail. And the next few rows we're going to be working half in half double crochet and half in regular single crochet. So for anyone who needs a reminder, half double crochet is a US crochet term. And how you work them is you yarn over your hook, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. So you should have 3 loops on your hook, then yarn over and pull through all 3. Basically what it does is it just creates a slightly taller stitch than a regular single crochet. So for the next 4 rows, we'll be working 15 half double crochet and then the rest of the row in single crochet only. So now we're just going to go ahead and work up the rest of the tail. So we've just worked our final row of 12 single crochet and we're going to finish off. Now I'm going to stuff the tail through the opening, and again we're going to stuff it quite firmly. For today, the reason my stuffing looks weird is because I am using stuffing that I've reclaimed from other whips and projects that I was working on. I'm slowly working my way through that basket and just like reclaiming the yarn, the stuffing, the eyes, that sort of thing. So it's not quite as like new looking, but it works just fine for these projects. So yeah, no waste. So I'm going to stuff it up to sort of the base of this opening, but I'm not going to stuff it all the way up to the edge. And that's because we're going to want to squish that flat and attach that edge along the base of the back like that. So that's about as stuffed as I want. So I've stopped maybe 1 or 2 rows in from that opening. And there is the tail for the little squirrel. So we're going to pop that to one side for now as well. So at this point, we are going to move on and make his arm. So you're going to need 2 of these. So we're going to start with the magic ring of 6 and basically work up the little paw first, and then use some of the same techniques we used in the tail to curve the arm as well. So just like so. And then we want to bring our row up to 9 single crochet around to give it a little bit more width. So we're going to work 3 repeats of a single crochet and then an increase. Just like so, so you can see we've got 9 stitches around. We're then going to work 4 rows of 9 single crochet, so that's 36 single crochet in total, and that will finish building up the front of the little arm. So just like that, and we are going to put a little bit of stuffing just down inside that paw, and then we won't be stuffing the rest of this piece. Okay, so now as I mentioned, we're going to curve the arm to form almost a little boomerang shape. So in order to do that, what we do is in the next row, load a bunch of increases onto one side of the piece. So that row starts with 4 increases. Now I do use invisible increases for mine, it's just a personal preference thing. All it means is that I work the first stitch of the increase through the front loop only, and then the second stitch of the increase through both loops. So there we go. So right away you can kind of see that it is starting to try and bend in an upwards direction. And then we're going to finish that row with 5 single crochet. Then in the next couple of rows, what we're going to do is load our decreases along this back edge while using single crochets at the front, and that's going to just cement in that little bend. So we start with 8 single crochet, and they are basically being worked in the increases we did last row. Then a decrease, a single crochet, and a decrease. See the bend? That's what we're trying to do. So work the last 2 rows of this, which is just going to basically finish this end off. So there we go, we're going to finish off. And then weave that tail through the remaining stitches, front loops only, to form our little reverse magic ring. And pull tight to close. I'm just going to tuck that end away inside that arm. So there is one little squirrely arm, and we are of course going to need 2 of them. Pop those to one side, and next up we're going to make his ears. So these ears are formed as kind of like thick little triangles. See there? They kind of like have a good amount of squish and depth to them as well, and they work up really, really easily. So once again, I'm grabbing my grey. So grab the colour you're working in. And we're going to start with a magic ring of 6. Like so. So in the next row, what we're going to do is alternate between putting 3 single crochet into a stitch and then 1 single crochet into a stitch. So in the first stitch, we're going to put 3. And then 1 in the next one. And then 3, and then 1, and then 3, and then 1. So that should leave you with 12 stitches around, but because we focused it as 3s and then 1s instead of just putting an increase into each of them, we have more of a triangle shape, which is what we're kind of looking for this ear. If your magic ring has come a little bit loose, just tug the tail to tighten it up again. So next we are going to work 12 back post single crochet. So back post single crochet, for anyone who needs a reminder, is when we work around the post of the stitch instead of through the loops. So I'm going to insert my hook around the post of the stitch from the back to the back, and then work my single crochet as usual. So I'm going to repeat that 12 times around. Basically 1 stitch around each of the available posts. So there's number 12. So what you'll see there is that we've got this little ridge that we've built around the front. So that is going to be the front of your ear. If you give it a little poke, you'll note that it bows in slightly, which is going to give us that ear shape. So we're going to go back to working through both loops now. So what I always recommend you do when swapping from working post stitching back to loop stitching is count backwards from your hook the number of stitches in the row. So in this case, it's 12. 12, there we go. So the reason that I do that is because when swapping between post stitching and regular stitching, I find that I pretty often gain or lose a stitch just because it's not always super clear where the next stitch should fall. Looking at this, I might have thought it goes in there, but counting, I realized it goes in there. So I always make it a habit to count. So in the next row, we're basically going to be working the inverse of row 2. And what that means is we are going to single crochet 3 together. So I'm working in the front loops only for this, but you can do full on both loop level decreases if you like. And then single crochet in the next stitch. So then we're going to single crochet 3 together. And then single crochet in the next stitch. And last time, single crochet 3 together. And single crochet in the final stitch. So that should leave you with 6 stitches remaining around. and it might not be sitting in the correct shape, but we'll fix that in a minute. And finish off. So first things first, I am going to tuck the starting strand away inside. We're not stuffing it other than that though. Then use my remaining strand here to close off this little opening at the back. Then we're going to tuck that end away inside. Okay, and then what you're going to do is, so this is the front of the piece, that's our starting magic ring that's facing the camera at the moment. I'm just going to push that in and pinch around that ridge. It's going to form kind of a strangely circular shape, and then you're going to just pinch it again into the triangle. So that is what your little ear looks like. It can be a little bit messy at the back, that's okay. And you're just going to pinch to form the triangle. So there is one. So there is one ear, and of course we need two. Like so. Sorry I'm relying on so much crochet magic this pattern. It would just take so much longer if I had to actually stitch up all the pieces. So we're going to pop those to one side now too. So at this point you actually have everything that you need to assemble the basic squirrel, which is our little red fella here. So we've made ears, arms, feet, and the tail. So at this point what I might do is we'll stop and we'll assemble our grey squirrel up to this point here, and then we'll move on and we'll look at the optional extras like an acorn and some cheeks for anybody who's interested in those. Oh, such a cute little lump. So I'm going to start by pinning on the tail. Now, in order to work out where to attach this tail, what you need to do is find that little reverse magic ring that we did at the end of your squirrel and count 8 rows up the back. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'm just sticking a pin in there to help me mark that row. Then grab your tail. I'm going to tuck that extra tail just inside there as well, just to simplify things. We're going to pinch that flat so we have like a nice flat tab with which to hold our tail. And I'm going to line that flat opening up with the row that we marked so that it is sort of equally centered between those 2 feet. So this tail and arm position that we're going to do is actually going to be the same regardless of if you want your squirrel on all 4s or up on his hind feet. I'm just popping a couple of pins in there to fasten that edge down. So you'll see that it kind of hinges. And we're going to fold it up against the body and then kind of just here. So a couple of rows up on the body, we're going to pin the tail to the body again here. And when we sew that on, we'll be putting some stitches in there to hold it in that position as well. That's one side, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other. So that's going to hold his tail into a nice upright position. So you're going to want to make sure that your squirrel can stand. He might be a little bit wobbly at this stage. He's going to be back heavy until we attach his arms, which will help pull him forward a little bit. But in general, that is where we want that tail to be. So I'm going to take my needle and some of my grey, same grey that I've been using, and I'm just going to sew this tail on now. So I'm going to be working my needle in between the stitches and working along that flat base bit first, just stitching through every stitch, anchoring it the whole way along into the body. So now that I've done all the way along that bottom edge, I'm going to turn my work and I'm going to put a couple of little stitches up the side just to make sure that it's properly anchored. So just like that's fine. And then what I'm going to do is put one big stitch through the tail to anchor it to the back slightly further up. So I'm going to thread my needle through and up to where I want it to be. Then where we marked it with our pin, I'm going to insert my needle through all the way through to the other side. Curved needles can make that both easier and more difficult, so all the way through to the other side. Then a little locking stitch to anchor that in place there. And I'm going to put 2 stitches in there to lock that in. And I'm going to thread this needle in and back to where we started. And put a couple of little stitches up that side as well, just like we did on the other side. You could have done those to start with. I find that I get a better balance if I stitch down the base, then do my up the side kind of stitching. It's everything all nicely locked in where we want it to be. So when I'm done, I'm going to insert my needle back through the squirrel and out just somewhere in the body. Trim that off nice and close and tuck the end in. And that's my starting yarn. I'm going to do the same thing there. So there is our tail attached. He's rocking backwards and that is still fine. So I'm just going to make sure I've taken all of my pins out, Remember, if you're making this for kids, to count the pins you put in, count them as you take them out as well. We've all, I'm sure, had moments where we've forgotten a pin in there. So there we go. Now, next up, we're going to do our ears. So I'm going to pull those in. So the ears line up across several rows. So we're going to mark those rows first and then bring the ears in. So first up, you're going to want to find your starting magic ring and mark row 2. So I'm just putting my pin markers in the sort of the center, which just means that if I traced a line from the nose between the eyes, that's where I'm lining my pin up. And then I'm going to want row 4 as well. Now for that, I'm going to go off to the side. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. There is row 4 on that side. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there is row 4 on that side. So you should have 3 pin markers in place. Grab one of the little triangle ears. You've pinched it. It doesn't really matter which way up they go. Just pick the way that seems most squirrely for you. And we're going to line 2 corners at the base of that ear up with our pin markers. So you have your inner corner sitting at row 2 and your outer corner sitting in row 4. So there's one. I'm going to do the other one too. And that's where I'm going to be putting my ears. Now you'll note that mine are fighting the pins a little bit. They're going to do that just because of how thick that piece is. But with those pinned in place, we're going to grab our needle once again and just sew them on along this front edge. So there are the ears, and we're going to just give those a little tug test. You'll note that they do hinge because we've only attached them along that edge. That's intentional. And I'm just giving them a little pinch to form their points again. So finally, we have our arms. Now, we may choose not to sew these on now, particularly if we're going to be adding cheeks or an acorn that he's holding, just because you might need to move them slightly. But again, just for anyone who's trying to finish up this project at this point, all you need to do is count 9 rows down your side. So basically this row here, that's kind of that last loop under the mouth, and line up kind of the shoulder, which is where we finished off on the arm. So that's the unstuffed side of this piece. I just sort of pin it in one place so that you can like pivot around and form a position that you're happy with, and then put another pin in to lock it into place. And do the same thing on the other side. So 9 rows down, line up the top of the shoulder. So pivot and lock in place. So then you can kind of just make sure that he stands where you want him to, whether or not that's all fours or up on his back feet. But there is our little squirrel. Now I'm not going to sew those arms on until we've done our bonus pieces. So I'm going to pop him to one side now. What do you think, guys? How are we doing? You do a squirrely hug? Not really. Okay, so first of the bonus pieces, we are going to be making him a couple of chubby little cheeks. So those are 2 pieces that we basically sew onto the face to make him look like he is getting ready for winter. So grabbing the same yarn as we've been using, this piece is super easy to work up. We start with a magic ring of 6. Then we do 6 repeats of an increase to get us up to 12 stitches around. Like so. Then we're going to work 3 repeats of a single crochet, an increase, and then 2 single crochet. So there's our first one. We're going to do that twice more. That should bring us up to 15 stitches around, and then we're going to work a final row that is just 15 single crochet. Like so, then finish off. So there is 1 cheek, and you are of course going to need 2 of them. Wow, I don't know if you can hear that weather, but it's really stormy here right now. I'm going to keep filming, but I apologize for the rain that you're hearing in the background. So we're just going to pop those little cheeks to one side, and we're going to whip up a little acorn for him as well. So I've just used some brown yarn for this. I didn't mention it during tools and materials because it's not really part of the squirrel himself. It's more like a snack for the road. So this acorn is assembled all in one piece. We're going to start at the tip and then work our way up. And the trick to it is only stuffing the bottom part of it, not the cap. Right, so this brown yarn is also just 8 ply, 100% acrylic. It's the same brand that I've used for the grey, but that doesn't really matter. So start with a magic ring of 6. Then we're going to work 6 increases around. Like so. Not very acorny yet. We're then going to work 3 rows of 12 single crochet, so that's 36 single crochet in total. Like so, so that's the base of our nut. So then we're going to work a row of 12 front post single crochet. So we've already done back post on the ears, and now we're going to be doing front post. So once again, working around the post of the stitch, but this time we're going to insert our hook from the front back to the front, and then work our single crochet as per normal. So work 12 of those around. So there is my 12, and you'll see that we've got this little lip around the top of our acorn now. I am just going to take a little bit of stuffing and stuff what we've got, and then we won't be adding any more stuffing after this. As I mentioned, the trick to making this look like an acorn is to make sure that the base piece of it is stuffed quite a lot, and then the top bit is completely empty and can kind of like squish down for you. So in the next row, we're going back to working through the loops. So we're going to count backwards from our hook, 12 stitches, and my next stitch is going to go there. So our next row is 6 repeats of a single crochet and then an increase. We're building up to 18 stitches around. So there we go. The next row, we're going to do 6 repeats of a single crochet and then a decrease. Which should leave us with 12 stitches around, and then we are going to work 6 decreases. Like so, and then finish off. So we're once again going to weave our remaining tail through the front loops of any remaining stitches. So pull tight to close, then just squish the top of your acorn down. And I probably could have stuffed the base of mine a little bit more, but there it is. And you can leave the strand out if you want it to be a stick. Maybe just trim it off, or you can tuck it away inside nice and neatly. So there are our acorns. So now what we're going to do is pin on his cheeks and then basically finish assembling him. So I'm going to grab my first cheek here, and I'm going to identify where we finished off. Because I work in a spiral, that does give me this little bit of an edge. There are ways to avoid that, but I actually kind of sort of steer into it a little bit for this pattern. So just identify that little edge, and we're going to line it up on the edge of one of his eyes. So I'm then going to curl this around, and you'll see this is what I was saying about the arm. It's like this arm is too far up for me to fit the cheek in as well. So I'm going to take this arm off completely, and I'm going to curve this cheek around. Note that I've got the edge of the cheek covering the bottom third of the eye. I'm going to pin it down on the other side of the face as well. And then we're going to grab the base of it, which is still sort of flapping free, and we're going to scooch it up so that both loops are currently sitting against the head. I'm going to pin it down in a couple of places. Now, as we sew these on, we'll leave a little opening and shove some stuffing in there as well, just to give it some shape. There is our first cheek. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So once again, identify that little finishing off point. And this time it'll line up on the inside of the eye because we didn't do anything to like mirror the piece. There we go. And then pin it on the other side of the eye as well, so that it's covering the bottom third. And then scooch it up so that both loops of the piece are sitting flat against the head. And what's interesting here is that my right arm is actually in the right position. It was just the left arm that was too far up. So there are his chubby little cheeks. I'm now just going to reattach this arm on the other side. Basically all I'm doing is moving it down a row and then taking one of my acorns, I'm just going to pin it between his two front paws. And that is the final position of all of our pieces. So I'm just going to take a little bit more of my grey yarn and sew each of these pieces on now. So there is your little finished squirrel. I hope you had fun making him with me today. You have to let me know, do you prefer him double-cheeked? I can't say that. Guys, it's so hard not to make nut puns. I'm doing my best though. Do you prefer him with his cheeks all stuffed full? Or do you prefer him in like go-go racer mode? You'll have to let me know in the comments down below. Other than that, I'm going to see you next week. Okay, bye!